All right, kids, today I'm going to read you chapters 18, 19, and 20 of Escape from Warsaw. But before I do that, I want to go over the summaries for chapters 16 and 17. All right, so in chapter 16, the kids, Ruth, Branya, Jan, and Edek, they're traveling across Germany. They're in the Russian zone. That's the part of Russia, that's the part of Germany that's controlled by the Russian army. Remember, they're continuing their journey toward Switzerland. In chapter 16, they're traveling across Germany. They're on foot, and sometimes they're riding in the back of carts when they can. And pretty much that's all the action that takes place in this chapter. Jan gets separated from them. They kind of worry about it a little bit. Ruth worries about it a little bit, but she shouldn't have, because at the end of the day, when they all stopped, they stopped in the same place. Okay, chapter 17. The kids are still in Germany, but at the end of chapter 16, they've left the Russian zone and they've entered the American zone. Jan and Ruth now have jobs and are working, while Edek is trying to rest up from the journey previously and to regain his strength so they can continue their journey in a week or so. And Branya is staying with him, taking care of him. Jan starts showing up with food. Remember, this worries Ruth a little bit because some of the food has different labels that are English, and she worries that he's stealing. He says that he's not, but she still worries about it. Edek decides to follow him and see what's going on. He finds him meeting with another kid. Edek follows Jan and this kid to the railroad, and Edek proceeds to see Jan messing with a railroad switch, and he climbs up there to confront Jan. Jan runs away, but about that time, an American soldier comes and captures Edek. So that's where we are at the end of chapter 17. So let's see what happens to Edek in chapter 18. Chapter 18, Captain Greenwood. Captain Greenwood of the American Army of Occupation, aged 42 and already gray at the temples, was a lawyer in his hometown. His experience fitted him well for his present role of trying petty cases. He went to great trouble to be just. This was seldom easy, as nothing was straightforward in this foreign country, and the need for using interpreters made the hearing of evidence a slow business. The boy before him was a strange case. Edek Belitsky, 16, a Pole of no address, caught interfering with train signals. The prosecutor, Lieutenant James, claimed that he was one of a gang of train robbers and had been seen halting a train. The boy admitted having halted the train but denied the rest of the charge. As nobody else had been caught and the suspected attempt to rob the train had been abandoned, the whole case could not be proved. The attempt to connect him with the previous train robbery had broken down for lack of evidence. Pressed to give some reason for his action, Edek replied that it was a prank. Captain Greenwood was puzzled. The boy was obviously ill and did not look the sort to delight in pranks of that nature. Moreover, his refusal to have anyone to defend him did not make matters any easier. There was a sudden stir at the back of the court, and a corporal came forward with a message for the judge. After a few moments of whispered conversation, Captain Greenwood said, "Sure, if they can help us, show them in." Ruth, Jan, and Branya were shown in and made to stand beside Edek. Branya was holding Ruth's hand and grinning happily. Jan was biting his lip. His eyes were defiant. "There's been a mistake, and I've come to explain," said Ruth in Polish. "This is Jan. It's all his fault. I want to speak for him." The interpreter translated. "Who is the other child?" said the captain. My sister Branya, said Ruth. She has nothing to do with this, but I had to bring her along as I've nowhere to leave her. We're on our way to Switzerland and are camping by the mill stream. I see. What's the boy's full name? Said Captain Greenwood. Only Jan. That's the only name of his we know, said Ruth. Jan, have you any parents? Said Captain Greenwood. The gray cat and Jimpy, but they're dead, and Ruth's my mother now, said Jan sullenly. Captain Greenwood could make nothing of this. Ruth did her best to explain a situation she did not fully understand herself. We take it then that you have no parents, but that this young lady, Ruth Belitsky, age 18, sister of Eddick Belitsky, is your guardian, said Captain Greenwood. Your claim that Eddick Belitsky is wrongly accused. Lieutenant James here will read the charge and it will be translated for you. Listen carefully, Jan, and then answer our questions. The charge of halting the train and attempted robbery were read, and the prisoner was asked, guilty or not guilty. Jan's answer was to make a bolt for the door, where two guards seized him and brought him back, kicking and biting. Pardon me. In case y'all saw that, this is my daughter's computer. The judge spoke severely but without effect. He turned to Ruth. Have you any control over the boy? He's scared of the soldiers, said Ruth. If you'd kindly send those guards outside, sir, I think he'd behave himself. Captain Greenwood gasped. This was not a request that he had met with before, but one glance at the struggle in front of him convinced him that extraordinary measures were justifiable. He told the guards to release the prisoner and wait outside the door. Jan collapsed on the floor, panting and angry, his eyes flashing. Captain Greenwood waited for him to calm down, then asked him to stand up. To his surprise, the boy obeyed. We are here to know the truth, he added, abandoning all formality. Now, Jan, will you tell us in your own words what happened? Jan looked around the court suspiciously. Except for the lieutenant and the judge, there were no soldiers there, only the interpreter, a civilian, Eddick, Branya, and Ruth. This gave him some of the confidence he needed. He looked at Ruth. She smiled at him, but if her smile was an encouragement him to speak out, her words were a warning. Jan, no hanky-panky, she said. If you try that, you know what you'll get. Jan tried to see what she was holding behind her back, but he had to guess. With lowered eyes, he addressed the judge. It's not Eddick's fault. I changed the signal, and he came to stop me. I ran away, and he was caught. He needn't have been caught, but he's very stupid for a boy his age. He makes a mess of everything. What made you want to stop the train? Said Captain Greenwood. The food trucks. You were going to raid them yourself? No. You were one of a gang? Yes. Was Eddick Belitsky a member? No, he had nothing to do with the business. Who are the others? You mean the train robbers? I never met any of them, and I don't know anything about them. If I did, I wouldn't tell. Those soldiers outside can go and sniff them out. Ruth produced a stick from behind her back and gave Jan a good clout with it on the rear end. That's for being rude, she said. The clout had the desired effect, and he apologized. Captain Greenwood asked Lieutenant James, who had been prosecuting Eddick, if he wished to cross-examine Jan. With a self-important flourish of his papers, the lieutenant said that he did. He clearly thought that Captain Greenwood was taking too much upon himself. He had never cared for his superiors in formal ways. Clearing his throat a trifle too loudly, he leaned toward Jan. What did this gang pay you for your service? Nothing. You ask me to believe that you undertook this dangerous task for nothing? Of course, there was nothing to give me. The train wasn't robbed, but the other times. Jan bit his lip. In his unusual role of honesty, he had let his tongue run away with himself. Would you explain what you mean by the other times? Said Lieutenant James. They gave me a share of the food they took, and jolly good stuff it was, except for that fat ham, put in Branya. That made us all sick. Ooh, she cried, as Ruth rapped her over the knuckles. Lieutenant James ignored the interruption. I see. They gave you some of the loot, but you said just now that you had never met any of them. How could they give you food without you seeing them? They're a lot smarter than you think, Lieutenant, said Jan. They left it for me in a hiding place in the wood. How many times did this happen? Twice. At this point, Captain Greenwood intervened. You are going beyond the terms of the charge, Lieutenant James. Nothing will be gained by pursuing this line any further now. With respect, sir, Are you satisfied that the prisoner is guilty of the charge you have brought? Perfectly. Then you can leave the matter at that. Have you no further relevant questions to put? No, sir, barked the lieutenant, banging his papers on the desk as he sat down. Captain Greenwood turned to Jan and spoke gently. Why do you go in for stealing when you can get plenty to eat at the food kitchens? We can't live otherwise, said Jan bitterly. It has become a habit, a bad habit, said Captain Greenwood. The Nazis stole everything from our country and left us with nothing, said Jan. Now it's our turn to steal from them. But this is American food you have been stealing, not Nazi food. It is sent here to feed you and all the other refugees that are flooding the country. If you steal it, you are robbing your own people. Do you think that is right or sensible? I want to feed Ruth and Branya and Edic, said Jan fiercely, and the captain's unexpected gentleness brought the tears rolling down his cheeks. Edic is ill, and we're all hungry. I shall always steal if they are hungry. Do they steal? No, they are not as clever as I am, but everybody else does, even the Americans. They take cameras and glasses from the Germans. There are 100 cases of wine in your canteen, all stolen. I know where they got it from. Those are not proper observations, said Captain Greenwood. It won't help your case to bandy wild accusations of that sort. If there's any truth in them, they'll be brought to my notice and dealt with in the correct way. Ruth slipped an arm around Jan's shoulders and whispered something as he fought to choke back the sobs. Jan fumbled for an apology. At last he said, I speak with respect, sir, a phrase which, coming from his lips, sounded so comic that the captain could not help smiling. When I was your age, Jan, I was brought up on the 10 Commandments. Maybe they're out of fashion now. One of them is, thou shalt not steal. Ever heard of it? It doesn't work, said Jan. It must be made to work or everything will go to pieces. Don't forget that. Captain Greenwood shuffled the papers on his desk, summed up briefly, and passed sentence. Edic Belitsky, not guilty, case dismissed. Jan has pleaded guilty. Under the circumstance, I shall deal with him as lightly as I can. 200 marks fine or 7 days. There was a brief consultation between Ruth and Jan. Then Ruth spoke. Jan says he'll take the detention. We haven't enough money to pay the fine. We're saving up to buy a pair of boots for Edic, put in Branya. Thank you, sir, said Ruth. It isn't long, Jan, and you'll be looked after, said Captain Greenwood. When you come out, stick to that mother, as she's old enough not to have forgotten what decent behavior is. As an afterthought, he added, remind her to send me a postcard when you get to Switzerland. He cleared the court. Ruth held Jan's hand tightly till the guards came for him and led him away. He went without a struggle, not daring to look back at her. When he had gone, she gave one hand to Edic and one to Branya, and they walked slowly out. Alone in the courtroom, with a sigh, Captain Greenwood turned over his notes of the morning's cases, ready to draw up the reports for his senior officer. 3 cases of theft, 2 of failure to observe curfew, an old man accused of concealing a stormtrooper in his house, and lastly, Jan's case. It troubled him more than all the other cases put together. As he reflected on the punishment he had given the boy, he realized that for all his noble intentions, he had only been scratching on the surface of the problem he could not begin to solve. A week's detention could not prevent Jan from stealing again. Could Ruth prevent him? She was a remarkable girl, and if anybody could help him, it was she. But after 5 years of war and twisted living, such cases were too often beyond remedy. Chapter 19. The Bavarian Farmer. There were strange noises in the barn, louder than the scurrying of rats or the creaking of rusty hinges in the wind. The farmer flung the door open and shouted, "Come out of there, you young devil! I heard you! Can't you imitate a rat better than that?" He stood still, accustoming his eyes to the half-darkness of the barn. The sun rose early enough in July, but it was not full daylight yet, and all he could see was a vague blur of hay. While he listened, everything was so quiet that he began to wonder if he had been mistaken. Then the sound of a half-sob, stifled immediately, confirmed his suspicions. "Come out!" he shouted. "Do I smoke you out like rabbits, or fetch the prong?" The threats were ineffective, so he went to fetch the prong. Soon the hay was flying, and something else came flying too, an overripe turnip, which, beautifully aimed, struck the farmer full in the nape of the neck. He swore. An anxious voice piped up, "We give in. Please put that horrible thing away before it goes right through Branya." And the farmer turned around, his prong poised in mid-air, to find himself face to face with a tall, thin girl, her clothes and hair bristling with bits of hay. "We only spent the night here. We haven't done any harm." When she realized that he had not properly understood, Ruth called Edic. The hay at the farmer's feet parted, and Edic's spluttering face appeared. He had held his breath all too long and made a dive for the open air, clinging to the handle of the barn door while he coughed the chaff out of his lungs. "Hey, that's me you're stepping on," shrilled Branya as she emerged from under the farmer's left foot, and when she saw the murderous prong she flew to Ruth and hid behind her. "Edic, tell him we only spent the night here and we haven't done any harm," said Ruth, with one arm round Branya. Edic translated. By the way, a prong is a pitchfork. "No harm!" exclaimed the farmer, removing a splodgy mess from inside his shirt collar. "I suppose you call this a birthday present? 1, 2, 3 of you? Is that the lot? Or have we another batch lurking somewhere?" The reply was another wet turnip. It landed on exactly the same spot as before. The last member of the family, who was certainly no diplomat, had launched his second missile. Now he came sliding down from the top of the hay for no other reason than he had run out of ammunition. Branya giggled. Edic grinned, but Ruth was angry. "When will you grow up, you silly little boy?" she said, seizing him by the shoulders and shaking him like a puppy. "You'll spoil everything for us. I wish we'd left you in Warsaw." Jan, who had as usual acted from the highest of motives, began to protest. "Don't go for me, Ruth. I haven't stolen anything. The larder window was open all night, and I could have taken anything I wanted, but I didn't. You know I didn't." "Go on your knees and apologize," said Ruth. He didn't go on his knees, but he did mutter that he was sorry, and the farmer, who had by now removed most of the traces of bomb damage from his neck and was almost ready to see the funny side of the situation, was gracious enough to take the apology in good part. "Now, Mr. Interpreter," said the farmer to Edic, "perhaps you'll be good enough to explain your presence here." Briefly, Edic told him who they were, where they had come from, where they were going to, and why they had not, as they usually did, asked permission last night to sleep in the barn. They had arrived after dark and had not liked to disturb the household. "We'll willingly pay for our night's lodgings with a day's work," he finished. "Of course," said the farmer, "and if I'm not satisfied with you, I'll hand you over to the burgomaster." "What's a burgomaster?" said Branya, when Edic had interpreted, and from now on he had to explain everything, for the farmer knew little Polish. "A burgomaster, my dear, is a nasty boogeyman who plagues everybody beyond endurance. He'd be particularly interested in you. You're Poles, aren't you? Well, there's an order gone out from the military government that all Poles in the area are to be rounded up and sent back to Poland. It's the burgomaster's job to see that the order is obeyed." "We've just come from Poland. We're not going back again," said Ruth. "We're going to Switzerland to find our father and mother," said Branya. "Nothing on earth would send me back to Poland," said Edic. "Nor me," said Jan. "That's what you think. But if the military government decides you must go back, back you go, my lad. And neither rotten turnips nor anything else will save you," said the farmer. "Now come along and have a bite of breakfast." There were window boxes on the sills of the farmhouse, gay with flowers. On the scrubbed table in the kitchen, a breakfast of coffee and rolls for two had been laid. "Emma," called the farmer, "4 visitors for breakfast. 4 tattered bundles of mischief from Poland. Ruth, Edic, Jan, and Branya. They've walked all the way specifically to meet us. This is Frau Wolf, my wife. She speaks Polish. Learned it from 2 Poles who worked here during the war." A plump and comfortable-looking lady shook hands with each of them in turn and welcomed them to the table, went to fetch more breakfast. From now on, with her knowledge of Polish and Edic's of German, the conversation ran quite smoothly. "What's that mess on your collar, Kurt?" she asked when she came back. "A present from Poland," said the farmer, winking at Jan, and when Edic translated, they all laughed so much that they nearly spilled the coffee. "It was a clean shirt this morning," she complained. "Then I shall ask Jan to wash it for me, just to show my appreciation." "That's a wonderful idea," said Ruth. "No doubt Jan would have thought of it himself, only I beat him to it," said the farmer, winking at Ruth. "Jan has plenty of ideas, but not that sort," said Ruth. "Eat all you can," said Frau Wolf, depositing a plate of rolls on the table. "There's plenty more when you've finished this lot." Branya's eyes were wide with astonishment. Never had she seen so much food. "This is a farm, you know," Frau Wolf explained. "There is no shortage." The family was content. "You have made us so welcome," said Ruth. "I feel somehow as if you'd been expecting us." "Oh, you get to expect anything in these parts," said the farmer between gulps of coffee. "The woods are full of refugees like yourselves, you know. You're not by any means the first lot I've found in the barn. Last winter I found a whole family in the cowshed, curled round a cow to keep warm. Told me they'd walked all the way from the Ukraine. Didn't believe a word of it, of course. If you ask me, they'd just footed it from the next village, a stunt to get a free meal. I made 'em work for it, though. We've had dozens and dozens of refugees working here at one time or another. Got rid of them all now, thank the Lord. Now the military government sends us nothing but German prisoners of war, and they're worse. The government wants to turn us into an agricultural country. Holy onions, did you ever hear such nonsense? As if you could ever teach a mechanic how to milk a cow. He'd try it with a wrench if you didn't tell him how. The farmer rambled on like this for some time, munching great mouthfuls of bread between whiles and washing it down with cascades of coffee. Edic was the only one who bothered to listen, and when at last the farmer came to a full stop, he said, "I worked on a German farm during the war, but I hated every moment. The people weren't decent like you." The farmer appeared to take this harmless observation as an insult. "You think I'm decent, do you? Just wait till I've wrung a day's work out of you. You'll think very differently then. We'll start right now, as soon as you're done eating." "Let them rest today, Kurt," said his wife. "They're all of them worn out." The farmer thumped the table with his fist. "I don't believe in treating people soft," he said. "Treat 'em rough and they respect you. Give 'em the milk of kindness and it'll turn sour. No, they'll start right now. Ruth and Jan shall come with me to the hayfield, and there'll be no lunch for them if they slack off. Branya can feed the hens, and Edic shall stay in the kitchen to help me," said his wife. "He looks as if a breeze would snuff him out. He shall stay and peel the potatoes for me. That is, if he'd care to." And the look she gave her husband made it quite clear that she intended to have her own way in this matter. "Jan, you rascal, don't imagine I'll let you forget my shirt," said the farmer, thumping the table so fiercely that all the crockery jumped. And as far as Jan was concerned, the farmer had his way. The Burgermeister, Chapter 20. I'm not sure whether I told you, but a Burgermeister, think of it like the sheriff. Okay, Chapter 20, the Burgermeister. Kurt Wolf's farm was high up in the Bavarian hills, not very far from the Czechoslovakian border. The hills were thickly wooded right to the top, and between them the river Falcon came racing and twisting down on its way to join the Danube. A road passed through the field at the foot of the farm, northward toward Berlin, southward to the plains beyond the Danube. A few miles downstream was the village of Boding, where each day the Burgermeister received his unwelcome orders from the American troops stationed there. He was a tall, thin man in late middle age, a scientist and a social democrat who had lived in retirement from the rise of the Nazis in 1933 till the Americans fished him out some months back. He was shrewd and conscientious in a rather stupid way, but the anti-fraternization laws had soured him. He thought that Germans who were willing to cooperate with Americans should be treated as friends, not as enemies. As a go-between for his own people and the occupying power, he was answerable to both and invariably received more kicks than praise. In the eyes of the family, he was the devil himself. His present instructions were to round up all Polish and Ukrainian refugees in the area and dispatch them home in the American trucks provided. Most of them, and there were a considerable number lurking in the hills and villages, were only too glad to be going home. But there were some who, like the family, had their reasons for not returning. It was up to them to keep clear of him, for orders were orders and must not be disobeyed. So the farmer had offered to keep the family with him till the scare was over. They were only too pleased to accept, for they had quickly found out that, however much thunder there might be in his words, there was little in his heart, and his wife cared for them as if they were her own family. Jan, whom the farmer always referred to as the ex-convict, was particularly happy. He said that life on the farm was every bit as good as his week in prison. This he regarded as an achievement, and Ruth had quite failed to shake his pride in it. He made friends with an elderly and languishing mongrel dog named Ludwig. Until his arrival, it had lain dopily in the sun all day, resenting any attention shown to it. To anyone who did not know Jan, the vitality and devotion which he managed to coax out of this half-dead creature was astonishing. It followed him all over the farm, wherever he happened to be working. He worked hard and with enjoyment. Nevertheless, like the others, when the lorries of cheering home-going refugees swept up the road each evening, he was careful to keep out of sight. He, too, was afraid of the shadow of the Burgermeister. Once the Burgermeister paid a surprise visit, but the noise of his jeep rattling up the drive was warning enough, and they managed to reach the attic just in time. They lay there in the dust, all four of them, till he had gone. To their annoyance, the attic window was blocked up, and they failed to get a peep of him. Later, when they were down in the parlor, Jan pointed to a man's photo on the mantelpiece and said, "Does the Burgermeister look like that?" "Oh, no," said Frau Wolf. "He is not as handsome or as young as that." "Would he shoot us if he found us here?" said Branya. "He'd be more likely to shoot me for hiding you here," said the farmer. "But he's such a poor shot, he'd probably hit you by mistake. Of course our friend, the ex-convict, is the one he ought to shoot." "Pardon me. Let's talk about something more cheerful," said Ruth. She was admiring the smiling face of the young man in the photograph. She asked who it was. "That's my elder son," said Frau Wolf, without looking up from her knitting. "Father took the photo on his last leave before he went overseas." "You never told us you had any children," said Edith. "We haven't," said Frau Wolf. "Hans was killed in the desert at a place called Tobruk. Rudolph, he's in the other photo, standing at the back in uniform. Rudolph died later, fighting to keep the Russians out of Warsaw." "You mean he was in General Model's army?" said Edith. "Yes." "We might have seen him," said Jan, who was peering intently at the figure in the photo. "They all wore uniforms like that. They used to hide in the ruins and take pot shots at us as if we dared to come out of our rabbit holes. We hated them." "I liked them," said Branya. "They used to give me sweets." "That was the Russians. You've got the wrong army," said Jan. "Some of the Germans were nice," said Ruth, "especially in the early days of the war." Jan looked at Frau Wolf, quietly intent on her knitting, then at the farmer whose eyes had a gleam of sadness he had not seen before, then back to the photo. That there could be any connection between these homely folk and the soldier in the photo was beyond his understanding. After a moment he turned to the farmer and said, "You and I ought to be deadly enemies." "The only deadly enemy you have," said the farmer, "is the Burgermeister, and even he has not given you much cause for complaint as yet." "You wouldn't have hated Rudolf, Jan," said Frau Wolf. "How do you know?" "Because he loved Ludwig in the same way that you do. He trained him to be the best watchdog we ever had. He pined away when Rudolph was called up, but now that you've come, he's almost as fit as he used to be. You're like Rudolph in other ways, too." "Oh," said Jan. "He was sent to Warsaw to kill us," said Ruth. "I don't suppose he wanted to very much. If he were here now, he would treat us as friends, as you do, Frau Wolf. It all seems so stupid and senseless." "You'd like to be our mother, wouldn't you, Frau Wolf?" said Branya. "Yes, my dear, I would. I'd like to have you all. But you've got your own mother, and the most we can do for you is try to help you find her." She turned to Jan. "You have no mother, Jan. Would you like to stay here?" "Yes, I would, because of Ludwig. But I'd rather go with Ruth. Anyway, the sword wouldn't let me stay here, however much I wanted to." "What sword?" said Frau Wolf. Having mentioned the sword, there was nothing for it but to go and fetch it from his treasure box. "It's beautifully made," said Frau Wolf. "Where did you get it?" He told her how Joseph Belitsky had given it to him long ago, how Ruth had discovered it, how it had been ever since a pledge that Joseph was still alive and waiting for them, how when their spirits flagged it gave them hope and inspired them to go on. Then he put it on the mantelpiece beside the photo of Rudolph, and a shaft of sunshine from the window caught it and made the silver blade sparkle. Next day, Eddick and the ex-convict Next day, Eddick and the ex-convict were stacking hay together when a jeep swept past on the road, throwing up a cloud of dust behind it. It was traveling twice as fast as it should have been, and had just vanished behind a clump of trees when there was a loud explosion, a grinding of gears, a yell, and then silence. "Must have hit a tree," said Jan. "It's a flat tire," said Eddick. "Come on, we'd better go and help." Someone called out, "He may be hurt." "No, you don't know who it may be. Eddick, come back." But Eddick was halfway across the field already. He ran through the copse and found the car between two trees at right angles to the road. The windscreen was cracked, and a middle-aged man was fumbling with one hand on the door catch, wiping blood from his forehead with the other. "Flat tire," he said as he stumbled out. "Flung me right off the road." He knelt down by the front wheel. "Covers ripped right through." "Are you all right?" said Eddick in German. Yes. Have you got a handkerchief? This one's getting rather messy." "Afraid I haven't," said Eddick. "Never mind, I'll manage with this." The cut was not deep, and after a minute or two the blood was flowing more slowly. Together they checked the jeep for damage. Apart from the flat tire and cracks in the corner of the windscreen where it had struck a branch, there was nothing else. "Today of all days, when I'm in such a hurry," the man exclaimed. "I'll help you change the wheel," said Eddick. Anxious to help, Eddick forgot to be suspicious, and he set to work with the brace to unfasten the spare wheel, while the man, his handkerchief pressed to his forehead, stood by and watched. Out of the corner of his eye, Eddick stole a glance at him and knew at once that it was the Burgermeister. The thought did not worry him unduly, for his German was sound enough to pass most tests. "Working with Kurt Wolf?" the man asked. "Yes, he takes on extra help at this time of year." "I thought all his refugees had gone." Eddick started to cough. The effort to lift the spare wheel. Pardon me. I'm sorry. My slide went away. The effort to lift the spare wheel from its casing was too strenuous. The man threw down his blood-soaked handkerchief and heaved off the wheel. "You take a rest," he said. Just then Ludwig turned up, and that meant that Jan was somewhere around. Wagging his tail, he licked Eddick's hand. While the man was jacking up the damaged wheel, Eddick felt something drop at his feet. An acorn. He looked up and saw Jan high up in the leafy branches, making frantic signs to him. "Where do you come from?" the man asked as he unscrewed the nuts. "The north." "Oh, I took you for a refugee. Can you give me a hand with this spare? I seem to have wrenched my arm a bit." Eddick tried, but the effort made him cough again. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you. What about the lad up in the tree? Would he give a hand?" Eddick was taken aback. "Someone up in the tree?" he said lamely, then added, "It's my brother. Come down, Franz." But Jan, who thought the man who had not noticed him, was most reluctant to come down. "Come down and lend a hand, Franz," Eddick shouted, then explained to the man, "I'm afraid Franz is a bit deaf." This time Jan came down. "So you come from the north, Franz," said the man in a loud voice, and when Jan did not reply, he added, "Seems to be dumb as well." Yes, said Edic, making a sign to Jan. Jan took his cue, acting blank and stupid, while he helped the man heave the spare wheel on. Edic thought he was overdoing it with his vacant looks and gurgling noises, but the man did not seem to notice anything unusual. The wheel was on, and the man ready to drive off. Edic was congratulating himself on their success when suddenly Branya arrived on the scene and spoke to them in Polish. Edic tried to cover it up by replying in German. He was surprised that the man still took no notice. Switching the engine on, the man thanked the boys profusely for their help, backed the Jeep on to the road, and drove off. "You're a couple of worm-eaten lunatics," said Jan feelingly. "What did you want to climb in for?" said Edic. "To warn you that it was the Burgermeister." "I knew that. Even a worm-eaten lunatic could tell that. Anyway, I think we got away with it." "That's what you think," said Jan.